You're listening to Faithless Brewing, a Magic the Gathering podcast for the Spike Rogues. Each week, we design new decks for tournament plays and then put our creations to the test so we can share our findings on the air. What worked, what didn't, and what can be improved for the following weeks. On today's episode, Board was left once again to his own devices and is joined by modern expert 1stTurnNegator to figure out what the secrets of it can be kept in the Mausoleum. Hope you enjoy the episode and see you soon. Hello and welcome to the Faithless Brewing podcast. Tonight, our lovely CEO is still on a holiday. How can he just take another holiday? I know, it's the utmost betrayal to every single one of us. And David and Damon actually seem to have real lives. Everyone's abandoned me tonight. And yet again, I am not alone. So tonight, I'm joined by someone who has a little bit of a real life, but has an absolute love for MTG. You better know it as 1stTurnNegator. Soren, how is it going?
It is going great, Mord. How are you?
I'm doing great. Really lovely to have you here and put a face to the man behind so many brews, you know? It happens a lot the first time I record with someone. It's the first time I get to see their face or hear their voice. And sometimes it's just so different from what one will picture.
Yeah, I remember when Faithless Brewing, the original cast, Dan, Damon, and Dave, they did the video series with Wizards of the Coast, and I remember seeing the promo for it, and I was like, oh, that must be Dan, that must be Damon, that must be Dave, and then the video started playing. I got all three of them wrong. So...
No, I think I got something similar, and I got Dan, just because for some reason I was sure he was bald. So I knew that the ball had to be Dan. Dan, don't kill me. I still love you, man. Even when sometimes I ask you where you start shampooing and where do you use soap, like, I will never know, and I will still love you. So, Soren or Soren or Soren?
Soren.
Soren, exactly.
That's perfect. The American pronunciation, but the name is Danish. My mom is from Denmark, and I believe the correct pronunciation is somewhere along the lines of Soren. So that's...
Oh, Soren.
Yeah, so...
Sorry, okay.
That's...
Excellent.
It's about as good as I can do it, but yeah.
Just wanted to make sure I was calling you close to what you deem appropriate, because I know how it can be. My name is also likely unpronounceable for anyone that speaks English, so...
Yeah.
Like, it happens. Right, so... Sorry, thanks so much for being here. Why don't you tell us a bit about your Magic history, something close to what we did with Davius. How did it start? How long have you been playing?
I've been playing for quite some time, Emmy. I started at an after-school club in middle school when I was in 6th grade. This was in the year 1999. So Mercadian Masks was the new set. We were battling the Phyrexians, and I just absolutely fell in love with the game. And that's actually where my Magic Online screen name comes from. The very first deck I ever built was a Phyrexian Negator deck, which basically just tried to play a Dark Ritual on turn 1, play a 5/5 for 3 mana with Trample, with the huge downside that whenever it takes damage, you sacrifice that many permanents.
So literally a 1stTurnNegator.
Yes. I use that same name on like the local discords for some of the local shops that I play at, and I've definitely had some of the younger folks. I live in a college town, and some of the younger folks have been like, oh. I'll explain that. They'll be like, "Oh, I thought you just really liked casting the card Negate."
I thought you really liked So, hi, I'm 23. I'm a college boy. I was born in 1999, and I really thought you liked casting the card Negate.
Yeah.
I thought 1stTurnNegator came from a love to counter every single spell your opponent made starting on turn 1.
Yep. So,
I'm one of those college boys. I'm having that same reaction.
Yeah. So unfortunately, it's completely not playable in the current age of modern. But it is on the art for Unearth. So the newer art for Unearth. I guess there is a new one for the Double Masters. But the that creature that's crawling up.
The Modern Horizons one.
Yeah, that is Phyrexian Negator. Yeah. So then.
Oh yeah.
That was my deck throughout most of middle school, and actually stopped playing for a long time, and I got back into the game because I had a roommate. So hello to Kieran. He was my roommate at the time. He was engaged to someone whose family played Magic. So her whole family played Magic, and he was like, "Hey, didn't you used to play Magic? Like, like I got to get it in with this family." All the cousins, all the brothers and sisters, they all play Magic, so like you gotta teach me how to play. And I was like, sure, next time I go home, visit my parents, I'll grab some decks. And I brought them back with me and taught him how to play, and just remembered how much I loved it. And I've been playing ever since. And that was funny enough, I played from Mercadian Masks to the set Apocalypse, which was kind of the end of that story cycle, and I started playing again in New Phyrexia. So I when I got back into the game, I was like, oh, hey, Karn, I know who this guy is. I know the Phyrexians, and they must have been around the whole time, and it turned out that they weren't. They had been gone for,
It was just a lucky coincidence.
Yeah, it was just a weird coincidence, and I was just like, what is this? What is this Karn liberated? Like, restart the game? Like, what are these pluses and minuses? Like, I didn't know anything about what a planeswalker was, and so it was quite a trip. And they actually paid homage to Phyrexian Negator by printing Phyrexian Obliterator, which was supposed to be much better. That is still probably not modern, or even if it was in Pioneer, I don't think it would see play.
Phyrexian Obliterator, which I don't know, is, I think, one of the best anecdotes I have in Magic, because there was this really, really braggy player in my LGS, and he was playing against a guy that always plays Brew. Always plays brews, but like really bad brews, not good brews, bad brews. And the other guy went something like turn 4 Phyrexian Obliterator, and the braggy guy, who was all high and mighty, was like, okay, opt, bolt you, flip my thing in the eyes, attack you for 7. And there was this tiny itty bitty detail that Phyrexian Obliterator is a horror.
Yep.
So the other guy goes like, block, you suck 7 permanents. And everyone just, from all the tables in the LGS, because we had been hearing what was going on, just started laughing out loud. It was such a beautiful experience to watch.
Oh, that's amazing. One of these days, I'll put together a Phyrexian Obliterator, maybe Domri Raid, or one of the other fight cards. Put that together and see if I can get it to fight a I don't know, a Solitude or something. If you feel good.
Is Arena Modern Legal Note, right?
I believe it is. So you can tutor for that. There's Arena. There's Prey Upon. There's a couple of effects. So
yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, one of these days, I gotta do it at least once.
So, you started playing in 1999. Did you start playing with this love for brewing, or was that something that developed back when you came back into the game a lot of years later?
I think that was definitely when I got back into the game. I mean, when I was in middle school, it was, what did my weekly allowance allow me to buy? And, and where could you buy cards? I didn't have a credit card. I couldn't order cards off tcgplayer.com, or, I don't even know if that existed. It was a lot of looking at prices and Scry magazine. And seeing if you could trade the cards you don't want to the kids that had the cards that you do want. But I do have one distinct memory of going to the local mall, and there was a kiosk, not a full store, but just a kiosk that sold Magic cards. And I remember I bought a foil Phyrexian Negator for like $7, and that was a lot of money, for me at the time.
So, I know that perfectly.
Yeah, so it was a lot of just trying to figure out what can I get and what can I put. Should I buy a starter deck and upgrade? And I think I had a couple. I had a kind of a Grixis control one, and I think I had like a green white aggressive deck that had some, armadillo cloaks, and I think in the Grixis deck I had a Croesus the Purger. I opened one in a booster pack, so I think I built that deck from scratch to try to maximize attacking with that, and won some games, and but against some other middle school opponents. But once I got back into the game, it was and kind of in college, we me and my friends, it was how do we start playing? Okay, let's try out standard, put together some standard decks. I think the first deck I ever really got together was a Heartless Summoning deck with some, Frost Titans, and
oh, love it.
It was actually like kind of competitive. There was the Blue-White Delver deck, which was pretty busted at the time, and but it could still steal some wins. And I think that was the first deck I worked on, and eventually I don't think I was really playing seriously until Theros came out, and I think I started playing standard. The first Theros.
Okay. 2013.
Yeah. And I remember seeing the mono black deck came out, and I think it came out at the Pro Tour.
Yeah, Devotion Gary.
Yeah, Black Devotion, Lifebane Zombies and Pack Rats, and I remember before it was kind of recognized as it was this is like one of the best decks. I saw it, I believe it was the Pro Tour or maybe a 5.0 list, and I was like, I have to buy this. Like, I used to play mono black back in the day, and I bought into that deck. And I just played it for a year. Like, it was kind of a good and bad standard because there were so few decks that were good because monocolored was so pushed. But one of the great things was starting out in competitive play. Like, I just played the same deck for a long time and really got to learn it. And I think that kind of like got me into competitive Magic. But the games were great. That standard had some really interesting, there was only like 5 decks at the top of the format, but the gameplay was really great, and I started really innovating and like, can I add a color, can I play blue, can I play green, what does that get me, and just kind of started really tweaking out the deck, and eventually got it to got good with it. I got into Modern, started playing Naya, like kind of Naya Zoo. Around that time, Wizards in their infinite wisdom decided that Wild Nicottle had been banned for the wrong reasons, and came back to the format.
Because a 3/3 was not that strong.
Yeah. So, and then I played that deck in Modern for many years, and I was always trying to like innovate within that shell of Wild Nicottles and Night of the Reliquaries, and sometimes when Amulet was big, like I played 4 Blood Moon main deck, and when Collective Company came out, it's like, okay, how do you maximize Collective Company within this shell? Eventually that deck, Eldrazi Winter happened, and then right after that, Death Shadow became very popular, and then it became unplayable overnight. So that was kind of a Fatal Push got printed, I think, too. So, but man, that deck, I have a lot of great memories with that deck. It was a lot of fun. It was surprisingly competitive, and not everybody played it. So, but yeah, just crushed Twin.
I'm sad to say I have never played against Twin outside of Cube, so I have only heard legends and the myth about Twin and Por.
Yeah, this deck played chokes in the sideboard. This was before like Spirebluff Canal, so you had this like auto win, and it played 4 Quasali Pride Mages main deck. Like, yeah, it was it was a great time.
Okay, it was tuned to be Twin.
Yeah, it was a good time. Yeah.
But as you said, some of your first decks comes when you don't have. A lot of brewers like us start playing when we don't have the resources to actually afford the game. And it's a bit of a truth that necessity is the mother of invention, and that leads us down the pathway of, if I can't afford the real decks, I will still build something.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are still gonna make our path.
Absolutely. So now I have a Mana Traders account, and that makes things a lot easier to try out things online. But
Mana Traders is golden.
Yes.
Mana Traders is amazing. It's what keeps me playing. I don't own my decks IRL. I just have the Mana Traders, and it's my way to keep playing.
So yeah.
So I have seen a lot of your results are sort of toolboxy. You always you always talk about Toolbox or you always talk about tutor effects. At least in most your articles and builds. Do you have like a natural affinity towards them, or is this like just a normal coincidence?
Yeah, kind of. I think in a way, Toolbox decks are kind of like putting together a puzzle, and in a way, in the same way that a lot of combo players talk about, I'm going to try to storm off this game, and I'm going to, take do a big dredge turn, and I'm going to put this puzzle together to create something that's really cool, really neat, and kind of win the game that way. And in a lot of ways, Toolbox decks, you're still putting together a puzzle, but a lot of times that puzzle is trying to take apart your opponent's strategy in ways that you're playing cards that might not otherwise see play in a main deck. And sometimes you can get some really wacky sideboard cards that kind of you're putting together a puzzle where you're sort of undermining your opponent's deck, and maybe you have a finishing game plan that's not as strong as some of the more proactive things that the rest of the format is doing. And I think that's just like a really interesting puzzle. There's not always the most powerful thing you can be doing. Tutors cost mana. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. They cost extra mana.
Tutors do cost mana.
Sometimes they allow you to cheat on mana, but yeah, I think those type of decks are pretty interesting. And the play patterns are always the games are always different. It's not like Ad Nauseam where you're doing the same thing every single game. Your game plan is different based on what your opponent is doing. I think whatever your opponent opens with, your game plan is then different. My favorite deck that I've ever played was a standard deck. It was a blue-black control deck, and this was in Khans of Tarkir and Theros. And the only win condition that it was 4 Ashiok, the 3-mana Ashiok that doesn't really do anything by itself. It either mills or it steals creatures.
And that's it. And hope it's enough.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there was like an uncounterable serpent, the Pearl Lake Ancient. I think maybe that was in my sideboard, but for the most part, like the way that deck played was so different. Like depending on what you could steal from your opponent, if you were stealing Siege Rhinos, like your game plan was so much different than like if you were stealing 1 mana 2/1s from an aggro opponent. You had to play that game completely different, and that deck was really fun. Maybe it wasn't the best thing in the format, but I won a lot of really interesting games with it.
Well, the interesting games are part of what we love Magic. I have read you have an inclination for the control mirrors. You're closer to my type of people, right?
Yeah. Nowadays, control mirrors, they're all about Teferi Time Raveler, which is terrible, but
the enjoyment in the long game, in the long grind where every single decision matters, and sometimes it's doing nothing during 10 turns, and that's the best aspect of it.
Absolutely. That's a lot of fun.
Sometimes that's all you need to just love the game.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the beautiful parts about Magic. Sometimes what you love is what other people will hate, and vice versa, and that's always something people will strive for.
Yes.
This versatility in the game. As well as your love for Toolbox, I have seen that sometimes you're gonna play the best deck in the format, and sometimes you're just gonna go down the rabbit hole closer to something, I don't know, maybe something Davius Minimus will do and just play brews. How do you decide which tournament is worthy of a real deck? Or is it an aspect of, I consider this brew to be good enough against the meta where it might be better than the real deck?
It kind of depends what I'm playing, like what type of event I'm playing in. I don't really want to waste 30 tickets in a challenge if I don't think I have a chance to crack, the tier 1 decks. And, I think Modern is a little bit like that right now. Like I think the tier 1 decks are just so good that it's tough to beat all of them. I think you guys were talking about this a couple episodes ago. So, it almost feels like there's like 2 moderns right now. There's kind of like what you see in the first 3 rounds of a league, and then there's the modern that you see when you're 3-0 or 3-1. Like you're gonna see you're gonna see the tier 1 decks, and I think that the modern that you play in the first 3 rounds of a league is maybe a lot more fun than the ones at the end. And but it just kind of depends. Like if a deck is fun, like and I can go 3-2, 2-3, then I'll keep working on it. And I really enjoy trying to make decks a little bit better. So than the last time I played them.
So you enjoy the tuning more than the brewing? I'm a tuner, for example. Dan is more of a brewer.
I think so. I think they're the lines between the two are definitely, I think, a lot more blurry.
It's blurred.
Than but I love finding a brew that I get to tune. But I also enjoy kind of taking an existing deck and being like, you know what, I know I can make this better.
Yeah. That's what I love the most.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to like get into brewing as well. It's when people talk about brewing, I think it's very intimidating to sort of be like, I have to come up with a plus B plus C strategy from scratch, and then I'm gonna find all these obscure cards, and I'm gonna find the next Oval Chase Daredevil that like takes things, existing cards to the next level that were previously draft chaff. And but a lot of times you can look at a deck that 5-0'd and be like, you know what, this deck needs to be like, it needs to be splashing another color. It needs to cut this color and needs to splash something else. And that's like a great way to start. And then from there, maybe you find a pretty interesting synergy that wasn't there. I think that's a lot of fun.
You're just gonna go down the rabbit hole immediately. Once you start brewing, you tend to just go down the rabbit hole immediately.
Yeah, absolutely.
It starts with testing a few one-offs, then you add a new color, then you're just brewing stuff from zero and you're just losing yourself in the brews. Then you get to the 05s and then you start playing tier decks again, and it's like an up and down of how insane you can get before you need to reorganize yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So...
Alright, so let's go to the meat of today, I think... No. Before we get to the meat of today, I have a little bit of housekeeping to do, especially and foremost, saying hi to our new patrons. Arhelium? Unpronounceable, yeah, I know. Wait, give me a second. I'm not sure if unpronounceable is a second one, or it's Arhelium.
I think that's the second one. I think I've seen them on the Discord before, so they might be coming back.
Perfect. Yeah, okay, excellent. Yeah, they're coming back, so... I just want to thank our new patrons, which are actually two different. It's not a side note by Dan for Helium. It's Arhelium and Unpronounceable as two different entities. Just gotta make sure that was not like a side remark that I was saying. So, thanks so much for joining. Everybody, the best way to keep us going is to join our Patreon, show us the support you have for the show, get you Discord access alongside a myriad of beautiful brewers such as 1stTurnNegator present here, a person who we assume like to cast counter spells, but rather is just someone who likes to unearth stuff or dark ritual stuff. We were mistaken, we were deceived, and we were gonna sue for wrongful naming because it's clearly someone that likes to counter stuff.
Yeah, hey, I'll just say the Discord's a great place and to hang out and trade ideas, and a lot of people give. Yeah,
a lot of people just love throwing their ideas and getting feedback, and people just love discussing Magic, so what more beautiful than to surround yourself in people that enjoy the same aspect of it that you do. So, besides that, you can join us on YouTube as well, alongside Twitter and Facebook, where you will see our new content, the videos about the leaks we're discussing, and with that being said, we can jump to the meat of today, which is Mauseoleum Secrets. So why did we bring Soren today for Mauseoleum Secrets? And the reason is, during the last monthly project, Soren proposed Mauseoleum Secrets as his card of choice. And instead of doing what most people would do, which would be something like a small deck list or a tiny concept, he just went full on insane brewing. We were seeing posting after guide after article regarding the card. And he put so much work into the card, even if it didn't win the monthly vote. The card deserved at least its own episode, and who better to discuss it than the person that has likely casted the most times in Modern since its inception.
Yeah, thanks. It was a lot of fun doing that. I had brewed with it a little bit before, and I was like, hey, I think there's something here, and I think it's a little bit unexplored. But then I heard you and Brian suggest when you guys were going through the list of all the cards that were nominated, I heard you guys go, what can we do with this? Well, we can tutor for Profane Tutor, and then 2 turns later, get the card we actually want. And I was like, well, this card's not winning, so I better start working on it on my by myself. So that was pretty funny. I usually listen to this podcast while I'm driving to work, and I just was like, oh my gosh. So some tips if you're nominating a card, next time if you're in the Discord, maybe put a suggestion of like, what do you think you can do with it, instead of just putting a blank card and hoping that people will come up with something.
Yeah, if you don't give us any ideas, we're going to go down a weird rabbit hole where, depending on who starts, it's gonna get really crazy or really solid.
Yeah.
It's gonna be myself, and then gonna try to go for something always grindy, always mid-range, or it's gonna go down and he's just gonna say, you know what, we can combo with this. This is a combo piece. We don't know how, but it is. So the card that we have forgotten to describe is Mauseoleum Secrets, 1 and a black for an instant with undergrowth, which is the gold carry mechanic from Return to Ravnica. Sorry, City of Ravnica? Some of the new last Ravnicas.
Yes.
In which you may search your library for a black card with CMC less than or equal to the number of creatures in your graveyard, and put it into your hand. So we are talking about a 2-mana instant tutor for a black card that costs equally or less to the number of ones in your deck. Creatures in your graveyard.
Yeah, it's basically an instant speed demonic tutor that for some reason hasn't broken it out of the format. So lots to do with it.
Exactly. So what are the important rules about this card? First of all, it doesn't say mono black, so it's any black card. It could be Nip Mizzet, it could be Free Exile Obliterator. It doesn't have an in-between. It checks on resolution, not on cast, something close to traverse the Ulven Wall. So you can cycle in response to make it bigger, or you can exile your opponent's graveyard in order to stop them from getting anything that's more than 0. Lands are colorless except if they are not lands, ergo Egadin's Awakening or Malekith Rebirth. And as Soren went ahead and chose the 4 black cards, there's 4 0-mana cost black cards in Modern which are relevant.
Yeah, we have Asmora, we have Living End, we have Profane Tutor, which is a little bit silly to get, and Slaughter Pact. So if Twin ever gets unbanned, the first thing you should do is order some Slaughter Packs, because those definitely saw some play back in the day.
It was the spice back in the day when we didn't have Solitude.
Right.
And then in Pioneer, sadly, this means there's 0 mana black. There's zero mana value black cards in Pioneer. That was harder than it should have.
Yeah, so these are definitely notable because if you don't have any creatures in your graveyard, you can still get one of these, either as something you're building around, or just as kind of like a default action. So I definitely have cast a lot of Mausoleum Secrets for with 0 creatures in my graveyard to grab an Asmo. And that's been a pretty strong play.
It is. Asmo is a good card. And finally, this doesn't get my favorite black card. That's not a black card, Wasteland Strangler, because the Void is the Void, and it's the suckiest mechanic that Magic has ever come up with. I'm willing to say the Void is worse than Companion and fight it for it.
Yeah, it's weird. It's not even, you would think like, oh, it enters the battlefield, it loses color. But no, at no point does it have any color. So, but you still can't play it in Commander if you're not that color. So, I don't know. Weird mechanic.
Exactly. So, why do we play tutors? Why do we go ahead and actually fight through the restrictions? Because tutors always carry 2 downsides, or at least one. A, they add an extra cost to the card you're looking for. For example, something quite simple as Eladam Riscol can get you any creature, but you're adding 2 mana to its mana cost. So that's where you go into the fighting point, to the argument of like, is this creature at the right moment worth 2 extra mana? Or in the case of Mausoleum Secrets, not only the extra mana cost added to the versatility, but also the cost of making it work. For example, running stuff like Street Wraith. Why do we go through these lines?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's a lot of things that tutors do for you, both in the construction of your deck and in the actual gameplay, which is something we want to really think about when we're brewing around with this, because a lot of times Magic players think, hey, it's a tutor, it's busted, or it's so bad that it's unplayable. And I think Mauseoleum Secrets kind of hits a sweet spot where, yeah, it's obviously not getting banned tomorrow, but like I've still been able to do some really cool things with it, and 5.0 with it. And there's other tutors in the format, Eladamri's Call, Eldritch Evolution, that see some play with the correct building around it. So one of the things that they do is they allow you to find or they enable A plus B plus C combos. So kind of the one that I've been working with is Persist and Unmarked Grave, which are two cards that are doing something very powerful when they're together. But sometimes you have two Unmarked Graves in hand and no Persists, and it doesn't do anything, or vice versa. You have two Persists, or like the game that I played against Mord, this was a few weeks back, I ended up with 4 Persists in my hand. So
your hand was all persist and just nothing, and I was like, I'm losing this game. He has 5 cards in hand, I'm losing this game, and then you just concede.
So tutors should help you get the right piece, which allows you to do something unfair. In that game, it didn't happen, but it has happened for me in other things. Another thing it can do is it can enable the podcast. You guys talk about the rule of 8 a lot, which is essentially if you have 8 copies of an effect, you can be pretty sure that you're going to see it in either your opening hand or the first several turns of the game. But a lot of cards are very unique and don't have a rule of 8 because there's nothing else like them. So a couple of ones that I've tried to work around is Waste Not. There's no other card that does what Waste Not does. Another one is Heartless Summoning. That's something that if there were 8 Heartless Summonings, you could build a deck around it and be fairly feel like you're gonna be able to get that effect, and that's worth adding cards that are maybe not so good without it. So that's definitely a huge advantage for having a tutor. The other is, we've talked about this a little bit, is toolbox structures, which means you have a bunch of different pieces, a bunch of different cards that are maybe a little bit situational, but you can just run one of each, so that if you draw it, and it doesn't, if you draw a card that is great in the against combo, but you're playing against burn, that's not ideal, but you only have one of them, so you're essentially taking a mulligan, which you can still win from a lot of mulligans. But when you do draw that card against the right deck, it's a lot of times it's a auto win or close to an auto win. So you can have a toolbox structure for either your main deck or your sideboard.
In that case, you go, for example, like in stuff like something that's gonna be really common is like, is this Meddling Mage worth 4 mana in the right spot at the right time with something like Eladamri's Call, or just going into the insane complete opposite of like, is this Tormod's Crypt worth 4 mana with this card? And when I'm playing against Rage, yes, I want a 4 mana Tormod's Crypt if I can have it. The same way I want a 5 mana Magus of the Moon against specifically Tron.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it, especially for reactive decks. And when you're brewing with more proactive decks, you want to think about kind of like, how unfair is the thing that I'm doing. So in Reanimator, I mean, there's so many times, there's so many games where I want the top card of my deck to be a Persist, and I would absolutely pay 4 mana for it. It normally only costs 2, but that card is so good. Reanimating an Archon of Cruelty is so good that it is worth a lot more than just 4 mana. So we would want to. That's something where we would be very happy about that effect. So
yeah, the rule of 8 is always like, just having more effects and a different one is a lot of time extremely relevant. If you can justify a way to consistently find that Raven's Crime when it's good, it's not going to be that much worse than I thought it's the other times.
Yeah, and so you can kind of diversify your slots. If you're dead set, I want 8 discard spells, you can play, normally it's like, okay, I'm going to play 4 Thoughtseize, I'm going to play 4 Inquisition. But with a tutor package, you can maybe put some more high variance cards in there that, you can say, all right, I'm going to cut one of those and I'm going to play Raven's Crime. And every once in a while, you're going to be able to be like, I'm going to tutor for Raven's Crime and I got my Ren and 6 in play. Bye-bye, hand opponent. But you don't want to see it all the time. So... yeah, actually, one of the decks that I built was a 4-color deck, or I guess 5-color deck, and I had both Ren and 6, Raven's Crime, and Teferi Time Raveler, and you can lock your opponent out of casting any spells ever again. But I never got to pull it off. It's pretty unlikely.
That was the dream. Like, if it happens, it happens, and sadly, it never did.
No.
So... the other part that Dan asked here is something that I think I'm suited to answer, which is, has Yorion changed how toolbox strategies work? Like, once you start adding a lot of tutors, do you want more bullets? And in so, do you want to play the noodle as well?
That's a great question. That's a very good question.
And I think that's a yes and a no. So, you have to go back a lot of steps, because this question ramifies into that direction once you start asking, what am I toolboxing for? If what you're toolboxing for are permanents, then once you have a tutor for permanents, you're going to play ETBs or permanents that do stuff that you would do with instants or sorceries. Instead of playing push, you're going to play Skyclave Apparition or Solitude. So once you start tutoring for creatures, you're going to play creatures with effects you might want to look for, and those creatures you're going to want Solitude for. That's why in a lot of creature toolbox decks you're going to start finding Skyclave Apparition, Solitude, Fury, and such. It's not because you want to tutor for those, but because you have a tutor for Meddling Mage, why not have a Solitude that I might need to tutor for? And then you start justifying Yorion. The same happens with Enigmatic, with enchantments instead of creatures, and with any deck that has that tutoring for permanents. This doesn't happen once you're tutoring for, what's the name of this deck? If the Wilderness Reclamation deck was still alive.
Sure.
What was the name of the 4-mana instant?
Mystical Teachings.
Mystical Teachings,
yeah.
Exactly. Mystical Teachings decks would not play Yorion, I think.
Yeah, it kind of depends how much you are actually looking for toolbox pieces versus just trying to play your normal game plan. So, if the key aspect of your game plan is getting a Wilderness Wreck in play, maybe you don't want Yorion. But if your key aspect of your game plan is being able to tutor out different instants, then maybe you do. If you say, okay, I'm okay with getting a Wilderness Wreck in play in 20% less of my game. So it just kind of it's what's your key thing. But yeah, Yorion has definitely changed a lot of the ways that I think players build decks, and I'm kind of tired of seeing it, but it's had a very interesting history so far.
Watch your words very carefully, Mr. Soren. You are treading into dangerous waters once you start attacking the Sky Noodle.
If I absolutely agree with, I think, the point that you've made previously about companions, that if there was a lot more of them and we had more to choose from, they were, a very established part of the game, I think that would be a lot more interesting than what we have right now, where there's really only one deck that plays a companion that's really synergistic to the rest of its game plan, and it just happens to be the best deck in the format. So that's that grinds my gears a little bit. But it's not so much that like I don't like Yorion. It's like why is
I don't like companions when there are few of them.
Yeah, it's like when I have a companion that works that enables my zombie tribal deck, I would be totally happy to see a Yorion across the table for me. But like it's like, okay, you can either get a Yorion, which is like very synergistic to your game plan, or you can get a vanilla 5/5 that sometimes helps you beat a Blood Moon. Like,
that's free.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I played Hearthstone before I started playing Magic, and Companion is a concept stolen from Hearthstone. They had, I don't know if you ever played Hearthstone, but in Hearthstone you have your hero ability, and they had this deck setup where if every single card in your deck was even, it did something, and if every single card in your deck was odd, it did something. So Obosh and Giruda.
Mm-hmm.
I was in love with that mechanic, so when companions were getting spoiled, I was really happy. And the first spoil was Giganta, one of the first. And I was like, okay, we can play Giganta in Nib, we just gotta remove Supreme Verdict. That's it, we already have the companion we need, because I was playing Nib at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then they spoiled Yorion, and I think I was one of the first ones to say, this is free.
Yeah.
There's no reason not to play this.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely like changed the way that people build decks. Having more than 60 cards, I mean, that was heresy for years and years. So it's
still heresy for a lot of people today. Like,
sure.
Still nowadays, people will tilt at 80 cards.
Sure.
But yeah, Yorion has caused that change in the mentality of a lot of people and players, and I think it really changes how big decks and tutor decks play themselves because of exactly that.
Absolutely.
And then we go to, okay, so let's go down from tutors generally to Mausoleum Secrets. We talked about these three problems tutors tend to have: the fact that they add cost to something, that they only get specific cards, and that they might be too slow on tempo. How do these limitations act around Mausoleum Secrets? You separated those and you started by saying that the black cards, only getting black cards is the less restricted limitation. Why is that?
I think because black can do so many different things in Magic, it has one of the widest spreads of any color on the color pie. I mean, it does card draw, direct damage, discard. It has edict effects. It has spot removal. It has efficient threats. Think Death Shadow. It hates on the graveyard. It gains life. It ramps. There's recursion. It gives you sacrifice outlets. It gives you I don't know what to call them, but like surgical extraction effects. It gives you tutors. It gives you wraths. It can even destroy enchantments now, which is a new thing that they've gotten. So that's so many different things. And that's not even talking about combo potentials. And then when you add the gold cards to that, so multicolored cards that have black in their casting cost, what you can do expands even more. So a card that I've been playing with a lot is Drown in the Lock. All of a sudden you can tutor for counterspell, and that's won me just so many games. Even with just one Drown the Lock in my deck, a lot of the time, you can destroy artifacts with Rakdos Charm or Fracture. That's just so many different things.
You can get a lot with Agadim's Awakening if you have 3 creatures, or a tap land with 1.
Yeah, I've been really liking doing that. So that's not that bad. What is bad is the well, maybe I shouldn't say bad. What's more restrictive is the undergrowth mana restriction. This really changes, only being able to get cards that are equal to or less than the number of creatures in your graveyard. That really changes how this card works. It changes how you build your deck. And I don't think it's the end of the world, especially with kind of how mana efficient Modern is at the moment, and maybe Pioneer too. I think you really want to build your deck thinking about your Mausoleum Secrets deck, thinking about like, hey, what's the highest mana value that I need, and kind of work your way backwards to that. And it could be as low as 1, and I would say it could be as high as 3. I really think 4 is kind of the cutoff to being able to expect that Mausoleum Secrets can find a card. Like, can it happen? Sure. But like, I wouldn't even put a single card in my sideboard if I was counting on Mausoleums to be able to see it in a certain matchup. Like, it's just 4 is the part where it becomes unreasonable. I've tutored for Grief maybe 2 or 3 times, but you're really looking at kind of the bottom of the mana curve. So just kind of a quick little note. I mean, this kicks out certain cards. It kicks out Ad Nauseam, Damnation, Invoke Despair is a card that's been seeing a lot of play. Niv Mizzet, and probably most notably Yawgmoth is. Those are going to be very hard to find. Doesn't mean we can't play them, but like, you shouldn't count on Mausoleum Secrets being able to find those cards. The other thing you have to worry about is you can't play cards that exile large. Well, I'm going to say can't. Maybe be very careful about cards that exile large numbers of cards from your own graveyard. So Delve cards and Escape cards, Cling to Dust, Kroxa, Murktide Regent. These are cards that you want to be really careful about playing with because you don't want to, cast a Delve threat, have it die, and then be like, I really want to tutor for such and such now, and you can't. The only real exception I can find in kind of building decks was that Lazov, the Multifarious. So shout out Jiggy Wiggy, who's a big fan of this card.
Who is in love with the Kroxa Lazov builds.
Yeah, so maybe you can still play Kroxa in that, but it seems dubious. I don't know. I haven't tried it, but yeah, that's this is the big restriction of the card. But there are some ways to get around it. We typically think about the more mana something costs, the higher impact, the more powerful it's going to be. But there's actually a lot of cards that have quote-unquote small mana values that secrets can get, but they actually have an effect that allows you to dump more mana into them. So I've listed a ton of options here, but Turok is it's a 4 mana card, but it only costs 2 to get with Mausoleum Secrets. Valky and Tybalt is another one. There's shout out to Jerry Thompson for Dark Salvation. That's a kind of interesting one. But other ones that I played Erebos' Intervention. This has been a very big sleeper for me that I put in once and I've been really impressed with. You have March of Wretched Shadow, which is the black version of March of Otherworldly Light that doesn't see a whole lot of play, but you also get some interesting wraths in Dam if you're playing white, and the Meat Hook Massacre are kind of interesting. And I guess the last card that I'll call out for this is Torment of Hailfire. If you're kind of a big mana deck, these are all cost 2 or less, but they're much bigger spells. So there are some ways to cheat around that. So
yeah, the false mana cost, right? Dam is a 2 mana removal, but we all know it's a 4 mana wrath.
Mm-hmm.
Turak is a 4 mana creature in 99.9% of scenarios. Meathook Massacre and such, and those are the best ways to trick. To trick on this, actually finding you a win con. Because, as you said, if you want to consistently find something less than 3, well, maybe the closest thing you will have to a win con is Hellfire or Valky/Tybalt.
Right.
Or Death Cloud if you're insane. Literally insane.
Yeah, Death Cloud is something I thought about a lot, but had a lot of trouble. There's a lot of the big mana decks. If I could have 8 Sakura Tribe Elders, I think a lot of them would be doable, but the other options, there are some other effects that are pretty similar to that, like Dawn Treader Elk, and they're just not good. They're not up to modern playable, but so I haven't really been able to get anything to work the way I want it to, that kind of involve these big mana payoffs at the end of the game. But maybe there's something out there.
Maybe there's something to find that we're still lost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about what cards you tend to have in most of your lists. What are the staples starting from 0? What are the staple cards that you have in all your deck list, or are they just completely different per build?
So it really depends on what your build around is. So there's so many different build arounds. I think maybe it's best to kind of talk about them as we talk about specific decks. But I have a big list, but there are a lot of just grade A cards that go in a ton of different decks, and for a lot of them, it doesn't matter what your build around is. I think every list I built, almost every list I built, has started with 1 Malakir Rebirth in the main deck. That card has just been a real surprise for a lot of decks, especially decks that are trying to kill your creatures. It allows you to actually be tempo positive in a lot of cases. Maybe someone's trying to kill your 4 mana creature and it only costs 3 mana. They're spending 2 mana on a Terminate and you're spending 3 mana.
Getting it back for 1 mana.
Yeah, and it's a lot of decks don't play this because it's it's awkward a lot of the time. But being able to tutor for it is just been a huge hit. And every sideboard I built has started with 2 cards, and they are Lithoform Blight, which is the black spreading seas, kind of. Basically, it removes abilities and types from a land and costs 1 and a black for an enchantment, and then they get to...
It's a spreading seas, but instead of making it an island, it makes it into a city of brass without types.
A city of brass, yeah.
This used to be the Enigmatic Incarnation special. We were running this before running Spreading Seas. I don't know why.
The important thing is it kills Urza's Saga. That's all you need to know. It kills Urza's Saga.
And it attacks Tron.
Yeah.
It's like a stab against Tron. But yeah, 2 mana kills a Saga, draw a card.
Yes. There's some other applications. It's can be good against creativity if you're on the draw. It removes the mountain type line from a card, but mostly it's there to kill Urza Saga.
Stops a Valakut.
And the other card is Surgical Extraction. And this is kind of one of those cards that every player that's getting into the format, they're like, oh my god, Surgical Extraction is so good. Like, I just want to play a ton of these. It gets rid of the best card in their deck. And eventually, a more experienced player is like, this, you're telling me this is a 4-for-1, and that's kind of not how that works.
When I started playing, I think the 3-mana Ashiok from Ravnica was the Summer Surgical Extraction.
Yeah.
Everybody just says, no, this is amazing. I'm going to double their fetch lands. And the more you play, the more you realize, oh no.
Yes.
This is not correct.
But when you only put 1 in your sideboard and that goes into your main deck and you have access to 4 of them, that's a totally different story. And I've been it's won me a lot of games, especially with Cascade being everywhere. All you have to do is discard or counter 1 Cascade spell and you can really take apart your opponent's game plan. It doesn't come in against every deck, but when it comes in, man, it's really good. And yeah, that's basically what every Mausoleum Secrets list starts with, is you're starting with these. The other kind of big cards, there's a lot of them are the same black cards that you see in a lot of other decks. Fatal Push, Thoughtseizes. A very impressive one has been Bone Shards. For 1 black mana, a sorcery that kills anything, kills a creature or planeswalker, but you have to discard a card or sacrifice a creature. Not only does that is very efficient, but it can also help you turn on secrets by discarding a creature, sacrificing a creature you're not using. And then, like I mentioned this before, but Erebos' intervention has been came out of nowhere and has been really impressive for me in a lot of the kind of slower reactive decks that I built with it.
Did the Black March get some consideration?
Yeah, I think March is it's not as versatile as Erebos' intervention, but yeah, it in certain situations it's definitely more powerful. I think a lot of the decks that I've been building have been these like hyper mana efficient decks, and I think if you get into maybe something that's a little bit that can slow the game down a little bit more, that would have a lot of homes. So something like a control deck or mid range. But yeah, at 2 mana, there's the Doomblade variants, Terminate variants, whatever you want to call them. There's Dothi Voidwalker has been a really good card because it sacrifices itself to enable secrets, and it plays well with Malakir Rebirth.
It does.
Yeah, and Turok has been a great card, mostly out of the sideboard. But yeah, getting a bigger effect for just 2 mana. Has been great. There's some other cards that are interesting. That Collective Brutality is one. There's just a lot of
relics of the past.
Yeah, yeah. I think Feed the Swarm has been really interesting. That's another card that kills Urza Saga. And there's also there's the card Break the Ice that destroys any land that can produce colorless. I haven't played so much with that, but definitely interesting. But those are kind of like the key cards that you should be at least thinking about in every deck that is black, that has black mana. Once you get into other colors, your options get a little bit more interesting. White has Vindicate, which is an okay magic card, but the standouts have been Kaya's Guile and Fracture. just being able to tutor for these situational cards has been really strong, even if you just play one. Kaya's Guile is a little bit harder, as it's 3 mana. Generally, you want to prioritize, going as low as possible, but, it's very good against Murktide.
Yeah.
Dam has also been another good one for white. That's really interesting.
The false mono black card.
Yes. With red, you get a huge card for me has been Rakdos Charm. I know it sees no play anywhere else.
Really?
But this card is it is the red Kaya's Guile. Or the black-red Kaya's Guile. Exiles, it's a 2-mana instant, for those who aren't super familiar with it. It's red and black, destroys an artifact, exile target player's graveyard, or if you're playing against the 4-color pod deck, the cat combo, every creature deals 1 damage to its controller. So I've definitely done that, back in the Twin days. I haven't been able to pull it off against that deck yet, but
that's a dream.
Yes,
doing that. That's the spice from back on the Twin days. I have seen that in deck list from that time.
Yeah. So that card's been really impressive. Kind of the other big cards in red are Kolaghan's Command and Terminate. But if you want a card that destroys an artifact, you should be looking at the cheapest version first. Like if you say, hey, I've got 13 cards in my sideboard and I need cards for artifacts, you should play Rakdos Charm and then Kolaghan's Command. If you only have one, I think you should go with a cheaper option just because you're going to see it more often. You should play, if you've got 14 cards set, play Rakdos Charm first, go for the less powerful option, but the cheaper option, and then consider playing Kolaghan's Command. The big thing that red offers, though, is cards that destroy artifacts, because black can't do that unless it's a creature. When we get into blue, we get Drown in the Lock, which is just a huge effect to be able to tutor for. That's just, what other deck can say, hey, I'm going to tutor for Counterspell? I guess maybe we talked about Mystical Teachings earlier, but this is 2 mana cheaper.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and if you're playing black, you're playing discard, you're playing removal, you should, even if your opponent's not filling up their own graveyard, you should be helping them with it. The biggest downside to this card is that it's very awkward with Dothi Voidwalker unless you're playing against exactly a Cascade deck. So be careful of that.
Yeah, in most scenarios, it's not going to work.
Yeah, be careful of that. You also get, in blue, you get Unmoored Ego in case that's better than Necromentia. Sometimes it is. I don't really know what the metric is there.
I don't think it ever is. Like, I think a card is practically always better than a zombie.
Yeah.
Especially if you're playing black, that you should be able to deal with a zombie. And then I see that you have green, but green is just like better removal, right? Like just versatility in removal in most scenarios.
Yeah, if this was 2015, we would really be talking about these green cards because they were the cream of the crop removal. You got Abrupt Decay, you got Assassin's Trophy, even threw Golgari Charm in there.
Do you remember people saying Assassin's Trophy was going to transform Modern?
Yeah.
I remember people were insanely obsessed with that card on release, and then it was just like, eh?
Yeah, I pre-ordered them for like $20, I think, each. Like, man, yeah, money that's just gone out the window. Yeah, I mean, nowadays, white removal is so good that like these cards aren't that special. Yeah. So
they just got really outclassed.
Yeah, if you're playing green already, yeah, you can include these. But like, this is definitely not really an option. I don't think that these cards are like pulling me to adding green to a deck that has other colors in it. The one exception to that is Grist. Again, it's 3 mana, so maybe it's a little bit harder to enable it, but Grist is pretty powerful.
Yeah, Grist is a great magic card. It's the new better Lily of the Veil, and I'm not taking a no for an answer.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Besides the tutors, which are what we get, which is going to differ from build to build, which we are going to discuss in around 5-10 minutes, that like the different builds, what are the creatures you use to fill up the graveyard? Like, how do you stock your graveyard consistently enough that you know you're going to be able to at least tutor for 2 or 3 consistently? You said mostly 2 is like the golden number.
Yeah, 2 is kind of the number of like, that's maybe the cutoff for your like need to haves, and 3 mana is the like, hey, I want this card every now and again. So something like Kaya's Guile. Kaya's Guile is not absolutely critical to beating, let's say, Murktide, But it is very strong against Murktide.
Yeah, if you can get it, it's going to help in a lot of scenarios. Like killing a Ragavan plus exiling a graveyard.
Yeah.
It's just going to help you a lot.
Yeah. And so I think that's kind of, unless you really commit to, a deck that puts a ton of creatures in the graveyard, 2 is kind of the cutoff you need to have.
Okay.
But yeah, so you can look at your 0s through 2s and pick out a ton of different effects. But the way that we turn it on is the best. There's kind of 4 ways. There's self-enabling creatures, so creatures that put themselves in the graveyard for some value. There's discard outlets, sacrifice outlets, and finally the worst of them is self-mill. But the main thing we want to look at is, sorry to Cave Dan who loves his Crabvine, but the main thing we want to look at is creatures that put themselves in the graveyard and give you some value out of it. And again, you want to be thinking about what's the most mana efficient. And at 0 mana, we have kind of the one-off here that's probably not very good is Fairy Macabre. But then we have Street Wraith is something that, I've put in a ton of decks. It's 0 mana, 2 life, draw a card, undergrowth count goes up by 1.
Okay.
The only downside to playing Street Wraith is that sometimes you draw it against burn, and you can't play Giganta. But yeah, who cares?
We don't care about Giganta.
No. But then the other main one is the Evoke Elementals from MH2. So the Grief, Solitude, Fury, Endurance. Those ones, they go to the graveyard for free, and they give you a great amount of value.
Ironically, Grief, which is the only proactive one, it's the one that works best because it's really weird for you to Solitude or Grief on turn 1 to Solitude or Fury on turn 1 or 2, but it's really common and actually what you're looking for to Grief on turn 1.
Yes, so that's, it's kind of the best card that's on color, and, I've definitely built a lot of decks with it. It's not a perfect card for every strategy, but, when it's good, it's really impressive. But there's a ton of these cards. I won't go through all of them. I'll just kind of highlight a couple. But Insolent Neonate is a great way to go from 0 creature cards in your graveyard to 2 cards, because it sacrifices itself.
Okay.
And puts if you're playing Reanimator, puts a creature into the graveyard. It has some cool synergies with Malakir Rebirth. So you can actually, in that way, it's, maybe better than Ephemerate, comes back, you gotta do it again. That's won me a couple games. But there's a lot of interesting options. Hope of Girapur, Viscera Seer, a card that Cave Dan really tried to hype up, which was Liliana's Steward. I don't know if that one's playable.
What is that?
It is a 1 mana, 1,
I don't even know the card.
2/1/1 that you can sacrifice it to make your opponent discard a card. Or make any player discard a card.
Oh, Dan, why? This is bad. You gotta tap this. And only
Only as a sorcery.
Why?
The only thing I could think of with that was you play it turn 1, then turn 2, you play a Waste Knot, and then, I don't know, hopefully they discard what you want. I don't know.
Hopefully everything works out.
Yeah. On 2 mana, you get Augur of Skulls, which is at least card advantage, but yeah.
But just bad.
Yeah.
I mean, in 2 mana you have the Dusty Void Walker.
Yeah.
And then you have like this cycle of creatures that sacrifice themselves to do something. You have the Crater Makers, the Malevolent Hermits, Sakura Tribe Elder, Shriek Mod, Timeless Dragon is a cool one as well.
Yeah.
It's like a card that goes into a graveyard while also enabling like a 2/1 on its own, getting you the land plus an eventual 4/4.
Yeah, Waker of Waves is another good one that kind of, I think, the Waker of Waves and Timeless Dragon, I think, kind of go together because you can play them in slower strategies. I totally missed Timeless Dragon when I was building a lot of decks, and I wish, it wasn't until you guys did your moderation episode and you started talking about it, I was like, oh man, this card would be great in Mausoleum Secrets. So
in Mauseoleum Secrets.
Yeah. So I haven't been able to play with that yet, but it's on my list. And of course, you have cyclers. So any time where the cycle cost is either 1 or 2 mana, I think is probably also playable.
Yes, if you really want to go to the secrets, playing the good cyclers might help. Like, mostly the seemingly castable ones, or like the Windcaller Aven, which is actually like a 1-mana spell in some scenarios where giving flying can be relevant.
Yeah, Death Shadow deck, for example. Yeah.
Exactly. So, why don't we go to your first list? Like, what do you have for us? What was your first list with Mausoleum Secrets and how has it evolved?
Yeah, the very first list there was actually not mine. There was someone 5-0'd with this. I want to say it was in 2019. It was a blue-black shadow deck, and I was playing Windcaller Aven. The card's so obscure that I can't even get the name right. And I think it was playing Consuming Rights. Is that the card that it's a black fling? That's the sorcery speed. Just some really bizarre choices, and someone 5-0'd with it. I remember I built it the next week. I 5-0'd with it as well, and then somebody else got the publish, and I was very salty about that. So I think the fact that I didn't get a publish online is what kept Mausoleum Secrets in my head. And earlier this year I built I tried to rebuild that deck kind of from scratch. Mana's better now. Let's play some Tarmogoyfs. Let's play some Griefs. Grief was kind of the catalyst to all this. I was like, well, hey, wait a second. Now you have a card that goes to the graveyard for free besides Street Wraith. So we should be able to. We now have a rule of 8 of 0 mana Mausoleum Secrets enablers. And I went 4-1 twice with it, 3-2 twice with it. So that's a 75% win rate. Unfortunately, the deck was really boring to play. So I kind of put it up on the shelf, but it had some really cool lines. I found the Lithoform Blights right away. I found the Surgical Extractions, and
it was like a proof of concept. Like, can this work while we still stick to something close to comfort?
Yeah, exactly. And so, I kind of put it up on the shelf. Basically, the deck it needed to absolutely nut draw the opponent, and if it did, it won almost every time. And so basically, the games were kind of like, hey, is my opening hand above average? Yes. Maybe I think we have a really good shot at winning this. But like when it mulliganed too much, I mean, the deck did nothing. So. Then you guys had the nominate a card, and I nominated it, and I was like, I'm gonna start working on this right away. And the first league I played with it, I 5-0'd, which was a Reanimator deck
with some weird choices, if I can say so myself.
Yes, some very strange choices. It was a Grixis colors. I had seen Aspiring Spike play. I don't think I had watched him play, but he had a list with Insolent Neonates, and that's kind of like what triggered like this deck list. I was like, oh, that card. If you discard a reanimation target, you automatically get enough creatures in your graveyard to turn on secrets for either persist or unmarked grave. And so I built this deck with Ledger Shredder, Grief, Street Wraith, Mishra's Bauble, Insolent Neonates, and then kind of the big payoffs are Archon of Cruelty and Titan of Industry. And I think a little bit lucky because I 5-0'd right away. The deck definitely had some problems.
The transformational sideboard is what shocks me the most. Like the For the Shadow for Ragavan.
Yeah, the sideboard was, the idea was like, hey, like when they bring in all their graveyard hate, like let's bring in just a bunch of other creatures. So I put 4 Street Wraith, 4 Ragavan, and a couple of tutor targets. So Turok, Dothi Voidwalker, Rakdos Charm, and in addition to those stock Surgical Extraction, Lithoform Blight. And it turns out that like if you take out your Archon of Cruelty, like a Solitude is still gonna kill your Death Shadow. Or if you're worried if you're worried about your opponent's Archmage's Charm like countering a persist, well, it's still gonna steal your Death Shadow. So
a lot of the answers lined up the same. Like Graveyard Hate was not as relevant, and everything else hit both plans.
Yeah, exactly. So I've kind of been iterating on this deck. The other thing was this deck was playing 3 or 4 Baubles and 4 Street Wraiths, and that was just like you would look at your opening hands and be like, you would have like 4 of that effect, and you'd be like, I have no idea if this hand like is amazing or terrible because the top 4 of these cards are completely random, or close to being random.
I have a land, an insolent neonate, 2 Spirit Blade, 3 Mishra's Bubble.
Yeah, it's like, what does this hand
This could be anything.
So I learned pretty quickly that, like, you just cut the Ledger Shredders, cut the Mishra's Baubles. There is some amount of tolerance for that effect. So I am, I've stuck with Street Race, I've stuck with the Neonates, and I'm actually going down, a little bit. The Reanimator deck I've been playing recently is actually Mardu, and there's so much bounce effects and Brazen Borrowers, Ottawars, whatnot, that I added Ephemerates. I cut blue entirely. I added Ephemerates. That's been like a huge boon for the deck, because putting an Archon of Cruelty is not always that doesn't always end the game right away, but Ephemerate helps. It's also better with Grief, it turns out.
Against a lot of decks, like 4 color, you're not gonna win with a single Archon, right? It's like the card draw that's gonna keep bringing more rather than the presence of one. It's not like the old... Well, we're going to talk this in a few seconds, but the old Teen Fiends.
Yeah. And so this deck, I'll talk about a little bit more in depth just because this is, I think, kind of the most fun I've been having with it. But yeah, I'm on 4 Street Wraith, 4 Grief, some Malakir Rebirths, 3 Ephemerates, main deck tutor targets in Bone Shards and Fatal Push. But then I've actually gone up to 4 Unmarked Graves. I had this big realization that, like, hey, Unmarked Grave increases your undergrowth count, so like I should be maxing out on that effect. And when you do that, you can also play Unburial Rites as additional. It's a tutor for your reanimation spell. So 4 Archon of Cruelties, 4 Persist, 3 Mausoleum Secrets, and I've had a lot of I've had a couple of flex spots. Right now I'm playing Fable, the Mirror Breaker. I don't know if that's the best, but it's probably the most fun. I played Liliana the Veil. I played Haggle in this slot. I played a lot of cards.
Like, that's part of the testing, right? Like, you just go like, this could be a good idea. You test it, and it's not, but at least now you know. Yeah. Like, that's progress.
Yeah, it's definitely possible that this deck, the white cards do a lot. It's maybe possible that a 4-color build and playing some Tainted Indulgence is better than what I'm doing here. But the white sideboard cards are a huge boon to the deck. There's 4 Stony Silence, which is just amazing against Unlicensed Hearse. Basically, every deck that's playing Unlicensed Hearse can't get rid of a Stony Silence.
Yeah.
It also turns off Mishra's Baubles and Ragavan Treasures, which a lot of opponents are like, why can't I cast my spell? Why can't I cast... and then you wait like 10 seconds and they like untap everything and they're like, oh, okay, I think I got it.
I'm gonna admit I have lost more games than I should to currently great creators stopping my Ragavan Treasures.
Yeah.
But like knowing, like... I have an endurance in hand that I want to cast and I wait till my opponent sends them and like they cast a card and I'm like, should I do something in response to it? Nah, it's fine. And I'm like, oh no.
Oops.
What have I done? Stony Silence.
Yeah, the rest of the sideboard is definitely, it's very much targeted to beating the hate cards. The scariest hate cards are Ley Lines and Sagas. And so I've got 2 Wear Tears, Fracture, Rakdos Charm, and then the other scary card is Endurance. And so I'm playing 4 Ley Line of Sanctity, which is definitely it's not easy to have that in your opening hand every game, but when you do, it
helps.
It really helps. There's also a Surgical Extraction of Lithoform Blight that's in every deck. A Sarah's Emissary, which is great against Hammer and a couple other decks. I have only lost 1 match to this getting killed out of Hammer. Everyone else has I've put it in play against maybe 6 or 7 Hammer opponents, and there was one that didn't concede game 2, and I was like, what the heck is going on? And I won that game. I think I lost the first game. The next match, like everyone else had just, you name creature and they concede.
Yeah, it's an instant win.
Yeah, one opponent like didn't do it and it happened game 3 again. I was like, okay, that was kind of weird. Maybe they're just seeing what else I had. Put Sarah's Emissary into play game 3. And they Path to Exile it, and I was just, oh my gosh, didn't see that one coming. I'm also playing a Dam. I ran this deck through, I wasn't really initially considering this card. My friend Brad, who he owns a local game store in town, I was showing him the deck. He's like, he's a much better deck builder than I am. He was like, you can't cut dam. So it's still there. He was like, yeah, you got to play that. So that's kind of that's the deck. And it's I've been having a lot of fun with it. It's very good against, at FNM, and, it's one of those, it's really good at the first 3 matches of your league, but it does struggle against some of the tier 1 decks. 4 color is definitely rough with all the Eldamri's calls for endurances.
Yeah, I can see you sneaking a win against Murktide, or like leaving in is likely pretty easy as you start just getting Archons in your graveyard, and if they eventually living in, they're just gonna lose to itself.
Yeah, living end is a breeze. That's definitely very favored. The versions with Drown the Lock, I don't think I ever lost a single match to living end. But this deck it's a little bit worse, but without a leyline effect, they essentially can't beat you. Hammer is good. The worst, though, is Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth is really rough. Just Grist. I mean, they like Archon triggers. Like they don't even care that they have sacrificed creature. They're excited. Their creature's getting bigger, and then they Grist you or they combo you. It's really, really tough to beat that. Rhinos can be a little bit hard because they play just a million bounce spells, and some lists are playing like 4 Brazen Borrowers, and it's like, oh my gosh. So, but yeah, the absolute worst matchup is Jund, the Jund Saga decks, because Saga just puts you on such a clock, because they're like, I'm gonna get a piece of graveyard hate out, and I'm gonna put other creatures, I'm putting bodies onto the battlefield for sacrifice triggers.
I'm gonna have bodies, I'm gonna have graveyard hate, I'm gonna have a clock, and I'm gonna Ragavan on turn 1 plus Thoughtseize, always.
Yeah, I mean, they're even playing Riveteer's Charm main deck, like, ooh, yeah, that's tough. So that's my Reanimator deck. I've tried a couple of other ideas. I've tried to build one that was a half Asmo, half Reanimator deck. It didn't work very well. But there is another player this is the only other person who I know who is working with Mausoleum Secrets. It's a player called Walker. Walked. WALKED on Discord and MTGO. I've seen them on the Reanimator Discord, and they actually posted a primer on their Twitter, which is at WalkedAir, and it's a Tin Fins deck, so they're actually playing like all the tutors. They're playing Mausoleum Secrets, Profane Tutor, it's Asmo plus Goryo's Vengeance for Gristlebrand and Emrakul. I think this style of deck had been talked about on the podcast before. So
the deck features 4 Mausoleum Secrets, 4 Profane Tutors. So it has not only, of course, the reason this deck doesn't just play on Markgrave if it's because it doesn't get legendary creatures, which both the creatures are trying to get back with Goryo's are of course legendary because Goryo's only gets back legendary stuff.
Right.
Which is the reason we always thank the Wizard Gods for making, and with Wizard Gods I mean Sam Black, for making sure on Markgrave said non-legendary creature. Sam Black, thank you again.
Great piece of design. So yeah, this is a very interesting deck. They're the only other person I know who's been working on it. So if you're working on it, hit me up on the Faithless Brewing Discord, and we'll share some ideas.
Of course, join the Discord and you can join us with far more good ideas. So besides this deck list, what are some other places where you think the card would be amazing? Where would you add this card if you had to choose right now a build that could be improved by it, you think?
So the deck that I've been playing this past week has been Asmo, specifically the food deck. I originally started with this like weird Grixis deck.
The Esper one?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not playing Esper, and I'll talk about that in a sec. But yeah, I originally started with this like Grixis deck with Riel the Everwise. And I was like, what if this is like really like a mono black card, and we play Liliana the Veil and Underworld Cookbook, and I had some success with it, but all the changes I kept making to it just felt like maybe I was building a worse version of the Aspiring Spike blue black food deck or Esper food deck, and I had a lot of fun with it. I had a positive win rate with it on Magic Online, but eventually I was just like, I gotta try this other food deck. This was the first Asmo deck I've ever built, and Asmo decks are weird. They're just so strange.
It's weird they work so weirdly. It's like a different game almost.
Yeah, the packages that you have to include to make it work take up like over 50% of your like non-land slots in the deck, like between Cookbook and Asmo itself, the sagas, Daredevil, like you want to have some amount of saga tutor targets. But yeah, just very strange. So I was like, you know what, maybe I should go back and actually start with kind of an existing deck. And so yeah, I took Aspiring Spike's deck. I watched him play like one league with it. I kind of took some of his ideas and kind of spun them around. What I've been playing with is essentially his deck. He did this thing though where he's playing Giganta, and I don't really buy that you want to. I think Street Wraith is better. One of his arguments was like, hey, you know what, you want to be able to beat Blood Moon, so like this helps you beat Blood Moon. And I was kind of like, without, if your opponent Blood Moons you're only playing 20 lands normally, and all of a sudden your sagas go away. Now you're playing a 16 land deck and you're trying to spend 8 mana to get a generic 5/5. Like, I just don't think that's going to win you the game. I think I would rather like try to make my deck work better in general.
Okay.
So I added Street Race, added 3 Street Race because, they help play secrets. I cut 1 time Sieve, and I think I cut some Unearths just because I felt like...
Exactly, you're only 2 Unearth and 3 time Sieves, which are, I think, the biggest differences.
Yeah, that's kind of the big differences main deck. I'm playing a little bit light. I'm just playing 1 Mausoleum Secrets in the main and then 1 in the sideboard. And that's something that I've done with a handful of decks where I put more copies of secrets in the sideboard in a way that like legacy decks, they used to play Enlightened Tutor with this like artifact enchantment sideboard, where and they didn't really have any in their main deck. So I've kind of been messing around with this, and I think that it's working. I don't think you need to run 4 time Sieves and 4 Unearths. Included some other tutor targets in the sideboard. Another thing, I watched him play, and I'm not trying to criticize Aspiring Spike. He's a fabulous player and deck builder, but like, he was playing against Murktide, and he was like, oh, I gotta have, I don't want to bring in these prismatic endings against Murktide to beat Unlicensed Hearst, because if I get Blood Mooned, I can't play it. So I cut the white for red, because what happened in the next game is his opponent played a Unlicensed Hearst, and he didn't have any outs to it. So I was just like, well, you just play red, and so I'm playing a K Command, a Rakdos Charm, and an Upgrade, because I found in the leagues, I was having trouble beating Artifact Hate. I do have a Feed the Swarm for enchantments.
And K Command is such a good versatile card.
Yes.
Like, also works against 4C. Even if they don't find the hate, just playing the 3 mana instant is going to help you in a lot of games.
Yeah. And I think my biggest criticism of this deck is that I don't feel like it's a very good Ledger Shredder deck. Like, what this deck does with Ledger Shredder is just nowhere near as good as like what Murktide is doing, for example. But I still think it's very strong. I tried a league where I cut the Ledger Shredders for Expressive Iterations, and it felt about the same. I've been able to Mausoleum Secrets 4 times, Civ, and not had to draw them in awkward spots. I was able to win a game with Street Wraith where I was able to take I had enough artifacts to take 2 turns, but I wasn't able to go infinite, and I was playing against Grixis Death Shadow, so they had swamps. So I slammed the Street Wraith, took 2 extra turns, they were at 6, and I won the game, and Giganta wouldn't have done anything. They had 2 7/7 Death Shadows, so it was like, that I felt like, I felt a little bit justified.
In your defense, that Giganta was not gonna save you.
Yeah. So, I'm still learning the deck. I'm not gonna claim that my ideas are 100% better than, the changes that I made are 100% correct. But yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with it. It's a very strange deck. It's, I've been thinking of it, it's like the avocado of decks, because when its opening hand is just right, it's amazing. It's it's the best snack there is. But a lot of times you have a lot of dead cards in your hand for certain situations. Sometimes you can't cast Asmo. Other times your time saves are dead draws. But in a way, Secrets helps with that. I might want to go up to 2 Secrets main deck and 1 on the side. But yeah, it's been fun.
Help you add a bit of consistency.
Yeah.
All right, love it. Before we end, I would like to talk about two more deck lists. First, I want to touch slightly on Shan Sacrifice / Shan. You think that just helping you find the correct half of the deck might be enough?
Yeah, I built I originally built it as Jund, and it was a little bit clunky, and so I cut it back. I built it as Jund. I built kind of a fairly stock Jund list and added secrets to it. I was thinking that I don't really want to play Raven's Crime with Ren and 6, and it turned out that the mana was just not great, and eventually I switched it to just red-black, built it off the scam lists with the Griefs and the Furies as ways to turn on secrets. And kind of what I found in that, that deck it's so fair. What I found is that secrets was not very good game one. A lot of these decks, they suffer from you're drawing the wrong half of the deck problem. Either you draw all your fatal pushes against the combo, or you draw your Thoughtseizes against aggro, and that's been talked about to death. So I was like, well, maybe secrets will help. I found that to be kind of, it's just too mana inefficient. But once the game went to games 2 and 3 post sideboard, all of a sudden secrets became the best card in the deck. So I think the builds I had for that were 1 secret main, 2 in the sideboard, with a bunch of silver bullet targets. And I think that deck has a lot of promise. If that deck is good in a meta, I really think Secrets is a big enabler to that deck. And unfortunately, it also has a hard time keeping up with, the 4-color decks in the format, beating Veil Summer and Omnath and all that. But I think I was very happy with it as kind of something that really brought the sideboard to life. So if they ever print a good sideboard card against Yorion pile,
that's not bound to happen anytime soon.
Yeah.
I think unless it goes something like if your opponent has more than 60 cards in the deck, deal 5 damage to face.
Yeah. I don't think it's happening either. If they print a 3-mana Sundering Titan or something, but.
And finally, just as a closing bit of thoughts, I want to talk about the craziest deck list you have presented here and during the past couple of weeks, which is 5-color Death Denied Elementals.
Yeah, this was a deck that I took it to FNM. I've only played it once. This deck is way outside of my rental limit on Mana Traders, but it's a 4-color deck that it's playing Omnath, and all the evoke elementals that it can, and the main idea is you're going to play all these evoke elementals to stabilize, and then what you can do is you can cast secrets to get a Death Denied back your whole graveyard. Death Denied is a black X instant that returns X creature cards from your graveyard to your hand.
Yes.
And basically just using that to take over the game. So, and you don't have to worry about casting it for a ton of money because all of the elementals, they recast themselves for free. So that was a deck, and I took it to FNM. I went 3-1. I beat Burn, which never happens with 4-color, or not never, but almost never. But both sideboard games I tutored for a Piece of Life game. I think once I tutored for Erebos' Intervention, and another game I tutored for a sideboard Kaya's Guile, and those cards won me both games. So that was kind of neat. Again, this is a proof of concept.
Of course.
I think a better way to build this would maybe be to build a more controlling shell using Timeless Dragons, playing Dam, playing just a lot more exile-based removal. I guess Dam doesn't count, but being able to secrets for situational cards. One thing you could even do is you could play Living End if you went full exile and used alternate ways besides Cascade spells to cast your Living End, As Foretold. That's maybe a little bit out there, but with Solitude and with Waker of Waves, Timeless Dragon.
I think all we need for that is an Electrodominance / As Foretold effect that's black. So you could wish the tutor not only as a way to get Living End, but also the way to cast it.
Yeah.
Because I think the biggest problem with that sort of deck is the fact you don't have the rule of fate for the As Foretold itself.
Exactly.
Unless you're playing Grixis colors and you're going really deep.
Yep. If you have some way to, I think the Grixis versions are just a little bit too bad. If maybe there's another way to tutor for As Foretold, other than just trying to draw it with Waker of Waves triggers, then maybe there's something there. But I tried pretty hard to get a Living End deck together that was not Cascade, and there just wasn't anything there.
It's really hard to make it better than Cascade.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem, right? Like, the deck can be fun, it can be decent, but how do you make it better than a great deck?
Exactly. But yeah, maybe just the control version with Death Denied and lots of, again, Timeless Dragons, Waker Waves, Solitudes, tutoring for Drown the Locks, but around kind of a more blue-white controlling shell. That could be. I think that's the better way to build this, and maybe it's Esper. You get Dam, or maybe it's a 4-color where you also get Fury, or I don't know. I don't know if any of the green cards are worth it beyond the Sky Turtle. But yeah,
Sky Turtle.
Yeah.
I just love the Sky Turtle. And with that being said, is there anything you want to add? Lovely 1stTurnNegator, the one that doesn't counter as we expected.
No, yeah, this is what I've been working on. If you got any good deck lists that use Mausoleum Secrets, let me know, because I'd love to see them. I've tried a lot of ideas that we didn't talk about that did not work, like Heartless summoning Waste Not. I could not get a Waste Not deck to give me more than one win in a league.
Yeah. Players will get access to the drive, and there they will see a lot of deck lists that went undiscussed due to, time limits. But you will see that Soren has done his more than fair share of work in trying to see the best way to find this. And I think maybe the most underexplored shell, but maybe it's a bit tough to enable, is Mono Black Coffers. Like, in theory, it's amazing, but how do you fit enough creatures in there? And that's, I think, where the trouble starts.
Yeah. I think, again, if I think a lot of things would take off if there was another Sakura Tribe Elder-like card that gave you mana and put itself in the graveyard for a good rate, but not really at this point. So
we don't have that yet.
But yeah, I mean, there's Pioneer too. There's like Thopter Sword combo. In Modern, I think Camberleaf had a really cool deck that had Dark Heart of the Woods and Vito, the vampire. Those are both black cards. I think he was playing some other tutors, but that was a really neat deck.
Beautiful spice.
But this card is it's not busted, but I think it's playable.
It deserves more love than the one it's having right now.
Yeah, I think so. I think in Pioneer, Pioneer is not really my format that I know, but I think the Sacrifice decks, I think the Cat Oven decks are a great home for it, and maybe we'll see them pop up there.
That would be great. So, Soren, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Really enjoyed having you here, really enjoyed our talk, and what's more lovely than just talking with Brewing about people that also love it?
Absolutely. It was great to talk with you, and I'm on the Faithless Brewing Discord, so if you are there and have some ideas, definitely say hi. I will be at the I'm actually traveling to visit family next month, and I will be at the Copenhagen RCQ in Denmark, which is very exciting. And I know some of the folks in our Discord are going to be there, so I'm looking forward to meeting some people on a totally different continent that I didn't even realize there was an event going on, but I will be there that day, so I'm definitely going to stop by.
That's great. So, thanks so much for being here, and have a nice night, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you enjoyed the episode and the show and want to know more about our latest brews, you can support us via Patreon. This will grant you immediate access to our Discord, where you will not only find our faithless brewers, but also an army of mine-like players hoping to find the perfect brew, such as 1stTurnNegator, who came just from our Discord and became one of our beloved brewers. Finally, remember to tune in next week, as Kaden returns and we will go back to tackling some cards from Straits of New Capena. Have a nice night and hope you enjoy the show. Bye bye!